It's a new day on Deep Space Nine, and Rom, the underappreciated brother, is calling at Quark's for his breakfast. You could argue it's his supper as he works a night shift, and Quark's confused as to why he's not only fine with being given the lesser jobs, but is also now sampling human food. Rom doesn't care as he's happy with how things are going, and believes that once he's proven himself, O'Brien will reward his efforts. O'Brien has bigger things to worry about at the moment. Keiko's bonsai trees have turned into compost while she was away, due in no small part to Bashir trying to help without asking. Even Molly knows he's in the shit, which is why O'Brien greets her with chocolates. She's curiously fine with it all, despite having grown them for years. Perhaps it's because she had such a lovely time visiting Bajor's fire caves, or perhaps it's because she tells O'Brien that she's not really Keiko, but an entity that's possessing her body and will kill her if he doesn't do what they want. He takes it as a joke at first, then a possible illness after, but the demonstration of stopping her heart is enough to convince him. He tells Puppet Keiko that he won't endanger the station, but that's fine. All they want is for him to fiddle with the comm system and not ask any questions as to why. Oh, and they have all of Keiko's memories, so they know he's already thinking about how to science them out of her body. They tell him that whatever he thinks of, it won't be quick enough to stop the death of his wife. He starts planning the modifications back in his quarters with Puppet Keiko, during which he asks why they didn't just possess him instead. It would have been the quicker option after all. Bashir's arrival interrupts any answer. He's here with an apology plant, and pleased to discover Keiko doesn't plan to eject him from an airlock. In fact, she wants to make sure he's still coming tonight, Keiko having organised a now-not-so-surprise party for O'Brien's birthday, which is today. O'Brien says the party should be cancelled after Bashir's gone, but Puppet Keiko declines. Cancelling would be suspicious, and so would not reporting for work, so off O'Brien goes. It's a bit of an unusual day anyway, as Rom, the underappreciated brother, is here to cover for an illness, so that gives O'Brien some leeway in changing the plans a little more. He says he'll be off doing an important job all day, and not to be disturbed unless it's an emergency. Crawling through conduits gives him a chance to query the computer at least. Scans of Puppet Keiko can't find any inconsistencies, and none of his ideas for knocking them out will be fast enough either, which means he doesn't have much choice but to do what he's told. There's so much to do that he's late for his own party. He's also not in the mood and tries to pull Puppet Keiko to one side. They're busy talking to Jake though, as he wants to know if she saw any Pah-wraiths while she was on Bajor. The fire caves are haunted by them, according to legends Odo told him, something Puppet Keiko says they didn't see. Watching them with Molly is enough to anger O'Brien, and he crushes the glass he's holding. After excusing himself, he moves to another room. Puppet Keiko follows, and when told he's done what they asked, they say it was just a test. The job that they actually want doing will begin tomorrow. Until then, they want to keep up the pretense, to the point that, once the party's over, they insist O'Brien sleep with them in the same bed. Part of that might be cover, part of it just sticking with him, and part of it so that he doesn't have time to check the computer about those Pah-wraiths Jake mentioned. O'Brien's only able to learn that there are many thousands of references to them before Puppet Keiko calls him into the bedroom. The morning brings Puppet Keiko's instructions, along with a thinly veiled threat against Molly if shit goes bad. One of those was enough to convince O'Brien that he should try and involve Cisco, and he moves to do so after he's left his quarters. He doesn't get there, as on the promenade, Puppet Keiko calls his name before falling from a balcony. To the infirmary we go, where, after some questions for O'Brien from Cisco and Odo, Bashir tells him Keiko will be fine. He insists on seeing them briefly, and Puppet Keiko tells him they knew he was going to snitch. That might be part of why they're now telling O'Brien that he has to do a job he thinks will take a day and a half in 13 hours. That means getting creative, so it's lucky that his engineering shift currently has an unnaturally gifted talent on it, and one that knows how to keep his mouth shut too. Rom, the underappreciated brother, is happy to help, and, perhaps more importantly, equally happy to do it without asking questions. Being told it's a super-secret operation that he can't mention to anybody has him fully on board. He's so motivated, in fact, that we get a montage. O'Brien's tasks take him to Ops, which is where Dax corners him. She was doing a science on the wormhole when she noticed a problem in one of the systems. Tracking it back revealed more problems, so many in fact that she thinks we have a saboteur. The inevitable meeting brings Sisko and Odo on board. There are nearly 1,000 tiny alterations to the station, mostly linked to the communications system. O'Brien tries to downplay it by saying none of them currently pose a risk either alone or in concert, but Sisko still wants to know who's doing it. Cue a call from Puppet, Keiko and Molly to remind O'Brien to keep his trap shut. A hairbrush pulled slightly too hard is sufficient threat to make it work. That's why, when O'Brien returns to the meeting, he has an answer for who the saboteur might be. Rom, the underappreciated brother, is a little confused when Odo feels his collar. Rom tells him that he can't say why he's fiddling with stuff, and a wink from O'Brien lets him think the whole thing is part of the plan. O'Brien stays behind with the excuse of checking on things, while the others go to a holding cell. Rom's time being the underappreciated brother for Quark has given him plenty of experience for these circumstances, and he lasts a fair while before he starts asking to see O'Brien. Sisko wants answers, so Odo calls him in, though O'Brien disables the surveillance in Odo's holding cells on the way. Rom still refuses to talk until Odo's out of the room, and O'Brien lets him know about the cameras. He's fine with how things are going, and more than willing to keep his mouth shut for as long as required, but he just wants to know why O'Brien is so intent on firing a science wibbly at the wormhole. That's what all these alterations are going to do after all, and he thinks the result will be instant death to the aliens who live inside it. You know, those prophets the Bajorans are always going on about. This is news to O'Brien, and he wonders aloud why a Pah-wraith might have beef with the prophets. That's something Rom knows too after hearing it from Lita. They all used to live together apparently until the Pah-wraiths got chucked out for being utter cockends and trapped in those fire caves. It's the sort of thing that'd make you hold a grudge, one that you could pay back by, say, killing all the wankers who banished you and moving into their old gaff. O'Brien starts apologizing for the situation Rom's in, but he's smart enough to have already realized that it's not quite the secret Starfleet mission he was told. He'll still keep his mouth shut until it's over, though. Not telling Odo things is second nature. Just as well, really, as O'Brien's only got 12 minutes left. That makes it a bad time for Odo to stop him in a corridor, and an even worse time for him to mention that all of this is too much for one person to have done on their own. That's why he did a little checking and discovered some anomalies of his own, like the cameras in the holding cells being turned off a few minutes back. O'Brien doesn't have the time to bluff it out, so just twats him instead. On the plus side, everything's finished. That means a call to Puppet Keiko to tell them it's done, and that he knows what they're doing. He doesn't care about some time wankers in a wormhole, though, as long as he gets his wife back, so offers to fly Puppet Keiko there in a mega shuttle. An excuse to Dax lets us take off without too much trouble, and we stop in front of the wormhole. It's better than being near Deep Space Nine, as O'Brien's fiddling has turned it into a sodding Tesla coil. Some prompting from Puppet Keiko has O'Brien firing it straight at the mega shuttle. Puppet Keiko gets thoroughly Emperor Palpatined, and for a lot longer than the instant death we were told, too, but it would appear that taking this much juice up the jacksie has prevented them from killing Keiko, so that's nice, I guess. The screaming ends, and after a bit of falling over, she wakes up, safe and sound. Keiko's back home and telling O'Brien what it was like to have a Pah-wraith in her head, the whole thing presumably having been cleared up with Sisko, as we're not currently in a cell. It would appear O'Brien made the right choice too, as Keiko thinks the promise to let her go was bullshit, and she reckons O'Brien would have had much the same treatment. Rom, the underappreciated brother, is out as well, and looking worse for wear. That's not from his time in a cell, but rather the celebrating with his new crew. He's been promoted to day shift, O'Brien having rewarded either his work or his loyalty, so we'll leave him to rub his well-deserved success in Quark's face until the next adventure. Spooky stuff, mostly unknown beings that force the unwary to do their bidding with an undeserved air of smug superiority, kind of like a middle manager, but less abusive. We're in O'Brien must suffer territory again, of course, our resident whipping boy, and taking another one for the team. It's also a return to our Bajor and the Prophets plotline, albeit somewhat obliquely. We now know these maybe gods, maybe not, who live inside a swirly, have evil twins, though perhaps a binary moral attribution isn't appropriate when the so-called good versions arguably control a whole species through religion. Perhaps the difference is that everybody in a Pah-wraith vision has a beard. It'll be a while before we learn more about these fire caves and their inhabitants, but the episode does give us enough to raise a very pertinent question. How could this happen in the first place? If you've got some beings on your planet who can take control of humanoids, that feels like a thing you put on page 1 of your travel brochure. I can think of a few options here. Either 1, Keiko didn't mention where she was going, or 2, it's a secret, or 3, possession is either rare or new. Option 1, Keiko didn't mention where she was going. This is possible given that she lived and worked as a botanist on Bajor for months, but it's not likely. It would require there to be no sort of border control for entry to the planet, or similar on a territorial level on the surface, or limitations on entrance to the caves. It would also require her to have learned about the caves from someone or something that provided enough data to make it interesting, but didn't mention anything about an aspect which O'Brien learned had some 6,000 references in Bajoran culture. I think we can probably discount this one. Option 2, knowledge of possession has been kept secret. Now, if you've heard any sort of news about the Catholic Church over the past few decades, you'll probably know religions are capable of keeping their mouths shut about bad shit when they want to. So much so, in fact, that somebody accused of refusing to properly investigate that bad shit back in 2022 could even become the Pope, for example. Applying that to our story here, the idea that this is a vast conspiracy is possible, but again, not very likely. The sheer quantity of references to Pah-wraiths show this isn't something they have a lid on, though you could argue the best place to hide some mystical bullshit is in the middle of 1,000 other pieces of mystical bullshit. That being said, actual physical consequences are a bit harder to hide, and such things have a tendency to come out eventually. Bajor is not some backwater of superstition and nothing more. It is the seat of a spacefaring civilization, one with a firm grasp of science along with its culture. We're not in the realms of rumour and myth passed word of mouth from village to village. The Bajorans care very much about their history. There is a potential wild card with this option though, a little thing called the occupation that happened for a good 50 years. Such a disruptive event could theoretically cause unexplained phenomena to be placed at the feet of cardigan boogeymen, but it could also have resulted in the breakdown of that conspiracy itself. Fictions require a grip to maintain, and somebody else having a tighter grip than you could bugger the whole thing. On balance, we'll call this one a maybe. Option 3. Either this is very rare or Keiko's the first ever possession. Despite the name Pah-wraith being widely known and much legend about them being recorded, this might actually be the most likely. If Pah-wraiths were able to invade all and sundry who visited their caves, no amount of priests telling you not to talk about it is going to keep things quiet, at least not for several hundred years. It's possible then that such possessions are either exceedingly rare and sufficiently long ago that they've passed into myth, or that Keiko really is the first. That's not so difficult to believe either. If the Pah-wraiths are connected to the Celestial Temple, and we've been firing the wormhole up regularly for the past few years after centuries of little to no activity, that's a plausible catalyst for change. There's also the possibility that Bajorans are resistant to such things, perhaps from a lifetime of wormhole proximity, or perhaps as a result of some interference from the prophets. We've been here for over 4 years now, and this is the first possession we've even heard of. The victim being someone of a different species with no religious investment is certainly quite the coincidence. Whichever option it is, or even one that I've not covered for that matter, the episode has given us another player in the ongoing core story arc. Deep Space Nine has touched on the tale we first saw in the pilot relatively rarely over the years, the slowest of slow burns. The story also gives Rosalind Chow a chance to be more than O'Brien's wife, which is a pleasant change. You could argue, in fact, that the episode is a showcase for recurring characters, as Max Gredenchik got a slice of the pie too. Rom's transition from something more than the underappreciated brother is always fun to watch, though I'll admit there may be another reason why I like the guy with hyper-obsessions and a lack of social skills. That he's a fan favourite says much about Trek's viewership. More than anything, though, I'd argue this episode is a fascinating look at how relatively minor decisions can have unforeseen consequences. The original idea for this story had bugger all to do with Pah-wraiths, them being added later when those behind the scenes remembered a cut line from a story back in the very first season. That episode, the Nagus, was also where we first heard about the fire caves, though they were called the fire caverns back then. Without a discarded line from 4 years earlier, and the connection being made here on a whim, one of Deep Space Nine's most important plot elements might never have come to pass. Oh, and there's a cheeky little Babylon 5 crossover club catch before we go. Tekoa here, played by Rosie Malek Yonan, was also an unnamed doctor in the Season 2 episode Confessions and Lamentations. End of episode. Oi, what's all this then?
It's called Netscape Navigator.
Sounds fancy. What does it do?
I'm reliably informed that it's our portal to the information superhighway.
Oh, right. And that is...
I don't know. It sounds like some sort of transportation infrastructure, so I thought it might be what the search engines drive on.
I'm with you now. And that's how we get to the GeoCity, is it? Oh, are we there now?
No, we are not.
Well, what's that then?
I think we just killed one of my ancestors. Woof.